Hi, you're about to watch Rick and I discuss the Haftarah for Parshat B'midbar, which is from Hosea. It's a very interesting Haftarah. Hosea was a very interesting prophet and a lot to say about the people of Israel and husbands and wives. In any case, we hope you'll enjoy it. Meanwhile, it's also the weekend of Shavuot, and Rick and I have prepared a special Haftarah Plethora dealing with the Haftarah for the first day of Shavuot from Ezekiel. And as I said to you last week, it's a doozy. So I encourage you to take a look at that special edition of the Haftarah Plethora. You can find the link probably below or anywhere that you found the link for this Haftarah Plethora episode. Anyways, I hope you enjoy that as well. Wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, a Chag Sameach, and we'll see you next week.
Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam, Kol HaYiladim now. Simchat to the dagim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and Ezekiel, whom you might call the major leaguers of prophets. And some weeks, like this one, we dip into the minor leagues.
You calling Hosea a minor leaguer?
Well, Rick, he is one of the so-called 12 minor prophets, and we read from the major leaguers far more than from the minor prophets. In fact, this is only one of 3 times we read from Hosea during the year. But I'm the first to admit that Hosea is an impactful prophet and that this week's Haftarah is one of the most interesting of the year. And like last week, one that's made its way into the daily liturgy. But first, I'm Larry Herman, sipping some very fine wine and talking Haftarah to my good chaver, Rick Muller, aka the King of Cannellation. And here's the latest pictures of my granddaughter, Millie Rose, aka Amalia Vered, who's got a great big morning smile for her mother, Erin Beth.
And there she is celebrating her birthday. Boy, have you got a big smile.
I sure do. What better gift than celebrating with my granddaughter?
Hold on, that's not Millie, that's Billy, the dog.
Rick, can't I still love my dog? Anyways, let's get back to the Haftarah. Rick, what's the image you think of when you think of God?
Whoa, that's pretty heavy. The image that I think of when I think of God. You mean like an old man with a beard, Sistine Chapel-like, like Tzvi Resnick giving his vort on B'midbar?
Tzvi will love that. Well, that's one image, but I was thinking more along the lines of God's relationship to us. For example, in our prayers, we refer to God as Melech HaOlam, or King of the Universe.
Or in the Avinu Malkeinu, God is our Father and our King.
Right. And in the 23rd Psalm, Adonai Roi, God is my shepherd.
God's also our rock, our shield, our fortress, our deliverer.
Okay. I think you get the idea. But when we think of God in terms of his metaphorical relationship, it's generally hierarchical. God is king, father, even shepherd. We even have a beautiful piyut, or liturgical poem, that we sing throughout Yom Kippur, which plays on the God-people relationship. Ki anu amecha v'ata Eloheinu. We are your people, and you are our God. This is followed by children and father, servants and master, gathering in place, legacy and land, flock and shepherd, vineyard and keeper, work and maker, people and king, and one that says, Anu rayatecha va'ata dodenu, which gets translated as, we are your dear ones, and you are our beloved. Or alternatively, we are your bride, and you are our lover.
Okay, so where are you going with this one there, buddy?
Okay, back to the Haftarah, which covers most of the second chapter of Hosea. The first chapter introduced Hosea to us. Hosea was an 8th century prophet, probably from the northern kingdom of Israel, just before the fall and dispersal of that kingdom. The 14 chapters of Hosea deal with Israel's abandonment of God religiously, socially, sexually, and politically. He foresees the destruction and exile and calls for repentance that will ultimately lead to reconciliation and restoration. But the first chapter uses a metaphor that continues throughout the book, and especially in chapter 2, the one we read for the Haftarah, the relationship between the angry husband who condemns, punishes, and dishonors his unfaithful wife, and the wife who fails to recognize how good her husband has been to her. Eventually, the husband is willing to accept or even entice the wife back.
I see. So I assume that God is the angry husband and we, the people, are the wife.
Exactly. And although I recognize that in the times and language of the Bible, the husband-wife relationship was every bit as hierarchical as the father-child or king-subject relationship, for us, the husband-wife or lover-beloved relationship conjures up a more equal relationship. Starting in verse 4, Hosea prophesies using the spurned and angry husband and unfaithful wife metaphor. In verses 4 through 7, God calls her a harlot and disowns her children.
Meaning the people.
Right. And he accuses her of unfaithfulness.
Meaning worshiping other gods.
Right again. Then in verses 8 through 15, he describes her punishments. God will take away her grain, her wine, her oil, her wool, and linen. God will end her rejoicing on the festivals, the new moons, and Sabbaths, and the beasts of the field will devour her.
Pretty harsh.
Yes, but then in verses 16 through 19, God will coax her back. And the amazing thing is that in this chapter, the wife, meaning the people, as you pointed out, the people of Israel, do not even have to repent as a precondition to the reconciliation. And Hosea even makes a joke of it by using a pun, playing on the Hebrew word for husband, Baal, which is also the rival god.
Capital B for the Baal.
There
so
you go.
Maybe not so harsh after all.
Perhaps not. And finally, in the concluding 3 verses, we have the new covenant and the actual betrothal. There's so much to say about the conclusion, but I know that our time is running out. So I'll just make 2 points. First, in verse 20, the covenant is made with the other creatures of creation, the beasts, the birds, and the creeping things. In other words, God is offering to go back to Gan Eden, to paradise. And second, the last 2 verses repeat 3 times the words, Ve'eristichli, and I betroth you to me. Since Hebrew is gendered, it's clear that this is God, the husband, speaking to the people, the wife. And these are the words that we, tefillin wearers, recite each weekday morning as we wrap the tefillin straps around our fingers, just like a wedding band, conveying a sense both of ownership and commitment. Except that it's usually men who are saying it, and I, for one, tend to think of the Shekhinah, or the feminine image of God, when I actually recite those verses.
Well, it's a good thing that there are just a few trope highlights this week, since you had so much to say.
Sorry.
But for the second week in a row, we have very few of the rare and special trope. There's no pazers, no zarkas segols, no dargaz, and no kadma v'azlaz.
Oh no, another week without a kadma v'azla? That's like a week without sunshine.
Yeah, I hear ya. It's pretty sad. But we do have 3 Tilisha Gedolas. It's a rare trope, and it's also special because it's one of the only, there's only 2 pre-positive trope, Yativ being the other one.
What's pre-positive?
Pre-positive means that it always appears on the first letter of the word, not on the stressed syllable, which would be the impositive syllable. I learned this a while back. And then some of the trope are post-positive. They always appear on the last letter of the word, like pashta, but you don't hardly sing it there. You sing it on the stressed syllable. But here, Tilisha Gedolah is on that first letter, but you don't sing it there. Since all 3 are at the beginning of the Haftarah, why don't you tell us about how we're going to divide up the chanting, and then I'll go into that first part before I start.
Positively fascinating. I suggest a five-part division this week. Verses 1 through 3, the Haftarah actually starts with positive verses, not only
Okay.
pre-positive, but positive, about the
Yes.
people of Israel and Judah. These are actually the verses that connect the Haftarah to the Parsha. Then verses 4 through 7 introduce the allegory of the harlot and the spurned wife. In verses 8 through 15, her punishments are described. But in verses 16 through 19, God welcomes her back and they reconcile. And finally, in the last three verses, we have the covenant and the betrothal.
Sounds good. So the Haftarah is found on page 787 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash. As I was saying, twice in that first verse, on the word v'haya, you have the Talisha Gedolah on the Vav, but you don't sing it there. You sing it on the Yud. The word v'haya is emphasized there. And then verse 2, v'nik betsu, it appears on the Vav, but you don't sing it there. You sing it on the tzadi, on that last syllable. So to me, and these are all the fireworks of the Haftarah. So to me, the trope master, Aaron Ben Asher, a long time ago, 1,000 years ago, he decided to put these here to stress the V'nik Betsu, that the people will assemble again together. Yachad comes a little bit later, but V'nik Betsu, like kibbutz, like a congregation, togetherness, settled together. Judah and Israel will be together again. So that's the main thrust of the. To me, that's the main point of the Haftarah. Okay, so I'll do the bracha and then we'll start. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
V'haya mispar b'nei Yisrael kechol hayam asher lo yimad v'lo yisafer v'haya bimkom asher yamer lahem lo amiyatem yamer lahem b'nei el chai v'nik betsu b'nei Yehuda u'b'nei Yisrael yachdav v'samu lahem rosh echad ve'alu min ha'aretz ki gadol yom Yisrael imru lachechem ami ve'la'achotechem ruchama.
Very good. So now we go to start with verse 4, where I suggested this is the verse where we're going to introduce the allegory of the harlot, but it actually starts with an image of a mother.
Yes, and Rivu is repeated, the poetry there, rebuke your mother, rebuke. Common trope, but I just wanted to point out the poetry there. And then the highlight of that section in verse 7, Eilcha, has the Gershayim. It's the rarest trope of that section. I will go in the feminine, Acharei me'ahavai, after my lovers. So the point is that we shouldn't do that along the way. We shouldn't go after just anybody, but we should focus on the main thing, which is God, of course, according to Hosea.
But this is the unfaithful wife who is actually going to her other lovers, to the god of Baal.
Yes.
Presumably.
Rivu v'imchem rivu, ki hi lo ishti, ve'anochi lo ishach, v'taser zenuneha mipaneha, v'na'afufeha miben shadeha, penavshitehena aruma, v'hitzagtiha kiyom hivaldah, v'samtiha chamidbar, v'shatiha ke'eretz siyah, Vahamitiha batsama.
Ooh.
Bet bam neha lo arachem. Kivene zenunim hema. Ki zanta imam hovisha horatam. Ki amra elcha achre me'ahavai notne lachmi umemai samri ufishti shamni v'shikuyai.
Pretty harsh stuff there. We haven't even
Yeah.
gotten to verses 8 through 15.
Yeah, yeah. So the next section is started with lachain. It's a common poetic use to start the section. We're going to have it again in verse 16, and it's done with a tavir,
Yeah.
which goes down then comes back up. So it is kind of a depressing, in a little bit, kind of trope, but you come back up. At the end of verse 9, Ki tov li, I fared better than now, is the English over there. That's also a tavir. And then verse 12, and now has a tavir. So the checkpoints, the milestones in the little story have that tavir in it. And again, there's lovers there in Me'ahava in verse 14. But
So there's a bunch of tavirs. There's one in verse 10 as well, and a bunch of revias, which all go down, at least to start, kind of
Yes.
suggesting this is a downer section.
yeah, you could say that.
Well, I did.
So 8 to 15.
8 to 15.
Lachen hineni sach et darkech basirim v'gadarti egderach untivoteha lo timtza v'ridfa et me'ahaveha v'lo tasig otam uvikshatam v'lo timtza ve'amra elcha, again elcha, ve'ashuva elishi harishon ki tov li az me'ata vehi lo yad'a ki anochi natati lach hadagan v'hatirosh v'hayitar v'chesef hirbeiti lach v'zahav asula ba'al lachen ashuv v'lakachti digani beito v'tiroshi v'moado v'hitzalti samri ufishti lechasot et ervatach ve'ata agale et navlutach le'nei me'ahavecha ve'ish lo yatzilena miyadi v'hishbati kol mesosach chagach chodshach v'shabbatach v'chol moadach v'hashimoti gafnach ut'einatach asher amra et nahema li asher natnu li me'ahavai v'samtihim leya'ar v'achalatam chayat hasadeh uvkati aleha et yimei habalim asher taktir lahem v'ta'ad nizmach v'chayatach v'telech achrei me'ahavecha ve'oti shachach ne'um Adonai.
Rick, you had a lot of those final hays with the dot in the middle.
Mapik, yes, the dot. It shows, thanks for bringing it up. It shows feminine possession. So if it's a noun and it's her noun, then it gets the dot there. So you don't have to put the word shalach after the noun. It's implied that it's her, whatever we're talking about. So yeah, it's all over the place there.
And you say it so clearly. I'm jealous.
It's not that
Anyways,
hard to do. You just kind of exhale a little bit, sir.
So
But
when
anyway,
we
yeah.
get to verse 16,
Yes.
you pointed out, it's very interesting that lachein, which starts it, which is a good indicator that it's kind of a new section. And it's in this section that's more positive, that God is going to forgive without even being asked his wife. He has every reason to be pretty upset because he's basically provided all the good things for the people, for his wife. And what does she do? She then turns around and she dedicates them not to him, but rather to the other alternative god, Baal.
Yeah.
So he has every reason to be upset, but what does he do instead? He entices her back. And then in verse 19, is it? Here we go. Sorry.
18, 19.
Yeah, I guess it's verse 18. We've got the pun. Tikra'i ishi, and call me ishi, which basically be your man, right?
My man, yes.
My man. You'll call me my man.
Instead of
Velo tikri'i li od ba'ali. And in contemporary Hebrew, a woman calls her husband Baal or Baali, and instead God is saying, no, you're not going to call me Baal because that would be the other God. You're going to call me Ishi, my man.
Yeah. Yep. Okay.
I guess it was funnier at the time. You had to be there.
Yeah. Lachen, hine anochi mefateha veholachtiha hamidbar vedibarti alibach venatati lach ekrameha misham vet emek achor lefetach tikva ve'anta shama kimehe neurecha uchiom alotach meretz mitzrayim. And then v'haya v'yomahu numadonai tikrei ishi v'lo tikrei li od bali v'asiroti et shmot habalim mipiha v'lo yizachru od bishmam.
All right. So now we get to the
Section.
The climax, the last three verses. And we should note that last Shabbat afternoon at Mincha, Rabbi Klickfeld taught on these verses, at least the last two verses, the verses of Eretz Tichli.
Yeah, they were very important to him when he was first at seminary. It's ones that really he really took meaning from them. And it's also in the commentary down below, how when you're wrapping your hand with tefillin, you say these two verses.
Indeed you do, I do, every morning, as I said. And that's the way in which the Haftarah for the second week in a row has entered into our daily liturgy.
Yeah, the rabbis liked it so much that they put it into use instead of just leaving it in the Haftarah. Okay.
All right, take us home, Rick.
V'charati lahem berit v'yohom hahu im chayat hasadeh v'imof hashamayim v'remes hadama v'keshet v'cherev u'milchama eshpohor min haaretz v'hishkavtim lavetach. Before I go on, the keshet there, the bow, when after the flood, the ark is the ark of the rainbow.
Right.
That's also going to be the symbol, right? So it strikes me that the symbol there and then the symbol there for the tefillin, they go together.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly what I was saying. And we go back to being at one with nature, with the animals. God is saying, I'll forgive you. We'll bring you back to the state you were in pre-flood, the Garden of Eden.
Yep. All right, now 21. Ve'rastich li leolam, ve'rastich li b'tzedek uv'mishpat, uv'chesed uv'rachamim, ve'rastich li b'emunah, ve'yada'at et Adonai. And that's feminine there, ve'yada'at.
Uh-huh.
As the people of Israel here are the bride.
Right. Again, like I said, I actually, in some ways, turn it around when I'm saying it every morning. So I invert the genders, although not when I'm actually saying the verses, only in my mind.
Okay.
So
whatever works.
Whatever. There you go. Whatever works, and that's what works for me.
Okay.
In any case, we again want to thank our technical advisor, our humor consultant, and our amphibiologist, Norm Gar, for all the work that he does. And don't forget to write us with your thoughts and comments. Our emails are below. We'll be taking the next week off, so we'll see you again in 2 weeks. We want to wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach for Shavuot. Yep. Happy cheesecake and happy all-night study.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.